I want to tell you the story about 5 very young men coming of age and getting on top of their emotions on the road to the Olympic Games, Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang just last year, 2018. That was the journey that was filled with a lot of expectations. There were 2 sets of brothers, and one of them was their best friend. They come from a long tradition of curling. All their families curled, and generations, in fact, of curlers. And they managed to leap ahead with new ideas and completely different perspective on sports psychology. And they embrace mindfulness and compassion in a very, very different way, in a very applied way, the way that worked for them every single day for 8 months. So my job as a sports psychologist was to start supporting them throughout 8 months, all the way, and including the Olympic Games. 8 months alone. What was phenomenal? I'll start from the end. And that is the last match. We lost the last match in playoffs. And overall, the team achieved 5th place. Not so bad in the Olympic Games, but certainly not good enough as far as the team was concerned. Not good enough for their ambitions and their desire to achieve the gold medal. There were 5 very passionate individuals, very passionate players. But what happened in this changing room was phenomenal. They were sitting there after the last battle, after the last defeat. Not one person pointed the finger at each other. Not one person walked away. They sat together. They won a lot of matches during the Olympic Games, and they lost together as a team. They experienced a lot of compassion for each other and also the team around them. I'd like to tell you a little bit about curling, for those of you who've never seen this sport before. So this sport played on ice, and individuals chucked the rocks down the sheet of ice, and these rocks are 20 kilograms, and the precision sometimes evaluated in millimeters. When the rock arrives to the target, it can be used, nudged, or moved by the opposition, and therefore it creates very complex choreography between your rocks and the rocks of the opposition. So in the end, the rock which is closest to the target wins, gets the point, wins the match effectively. My job was to work out what is the best way forward for them. Because what happens in curling is that, similar to, for example, sports like swimming or indeed rock climbing, there is no opposition. Unlike, for example, football or rugby, the opposition cannot interfere with your game. So therefore, the curlers throw stones against themselves. So what it means that there is a lot of time to think about what you do. And if your previous shot was not successful, your thinking goes down the path of what happened in the past. And this obviously interferes with the next shot. And equally, curlers think about the next shot as well. So there's a lot of thinking going on in their heads, and this is probably one of the greatest challenges for any target sports, including golf, curling in this number, is to cope with what's happening in their heads, not necessarily getting the best performance rock to the target. What is happening in their heads defines the quality of their performance. And what happened in the past in sports psychology is that there was a cognitive behavioral approach which was very, very popular, still is very popular in sports psychology currently, which suggests that there is such thing as bad thoughts and good thoughts. So the thoughts are broken down into parts, good and bad thoughts. And therefore, if you have bad thoughts in your head, your job is to get away from bad thoughts towards the good thoughts. So replacement, restructuring of your thinking. But what is interesting, there is another little detail, is sometimes the irony of our thinking is that when we try to get away from some kind of thoughts, negative thoughts, for example, we tend to think more and more and more about the thoughts, that exact thoughts that we're trying to get away from. This is called ironic thinking. And the irony is, don't think about this. Actually, no, I can't give it up because it's such a persistent thought. And especially if you're an athlete and you're in a battle, the battlegrounds against the opposition. Of course, you start thinking a lot of negative thoughts, undesirable thoughts, and get caught in this terror of thinking, constant thinking about the future or about the past. And therefore, what suffers is the present moment. These moments when you slide down the ice and deliver the stone to the target. So what I thought after many, many years, that perhaps the cognitive behavioral approach doesn't present the full richness, doesn't meet all of our needs in curling. And I introduced one element that was very, very new in curling, and that is mindfulness. And I just want to give you this quote of Salzburg, which says that, more we try to control our thinking, more we get caught in this loop that effectively paralyzes us. However, the mindfulness approach gives slightly bit different direction. It gave me different direction in my support for careless. And that is, we didn't divide the thoughts on the good thoughts and the bad thoughts. We just acknowledged that was thinking. And indeed, John Kabat-Zinn defined mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, at the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And indeed, John Kabat-Zinn works with American rowing team in mid-80s and had great results there. So I had a very good starting point there. So what we did with the team is we set up a very specific 4 points. And that is, the first one was awareness. Without awareness of what's going on in one particular moment, it is impossible to make any changes whatsoever. So therefore, the players were very much aware of what's going on in the match or indeed in their training sessions. The awareness is the opposite side of having an autopilot mindset. The autopilot mindset, especially on the battlefield in curling, would not get you to the right place. Usually, the autopilot gives you more negative thinking. And therefore, awareness of what's going on in our heads, in a difficult, challenging situation in a match, or indeed, a lot of students here in the exam, is very important element. So with awareness, you have a chance of making the changes. Without awareness, you just go on autopilot and things happen to you. Very passive point of view. And the second is acceptance. Acceptance was a critical element. So acceptance is not necessarily a passive concept. It's a very, very active concept. So without dividing the thoughts on the good thoughts and the bad thoughts, we accepted thoughts for what they were. We accepted the thoughts about the future, about the past, without dividing them on the bad ones and the good ones. Because the most important point to their competition was the present moment, what they do in this moment of time. And acceptance of the thinking, negative or positive, gave them an opportunity to move forward through the match all the time. And the key element to that was the return of their attention on the present moment. my pet subject in psychology is what we can control the controllables. But, very rarely we have the opportunity to sit down and really think, what can I control in a particular situation? And with Careless, we did exactly that. We focused on what can be controlled. We cannot control the past. We cannot control the future, however much we want it. The only thing that we have a lot of influence is this present moment. And in fact, that we defined this present moment as doing our jobs. They focus on their job. Their job effectively wasn't the analysis of the consequence of one shot, but doing this particular shot, this particular slide, and this particular sweep on whatever else they do, decision making, etc. That was the most important thing. And therefore, their awareness of where their thoughts are and bringing their focus into present moment was an essential part of using mindfulness in their performance. And of course, how do you do all of that? You can return your attention on the present moments with a lot of anger and frustration. And in fact, I put the radio microphone in very much like this one on Careless and listened to what they said during the matches. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. It was a lot of self-criticism. The brothers sometimes took each other for granted and gave each other a lot of hard time. So therefore, the kindness perhaps wasn't immediately on their minds. It's the winning the match, and therefore, whatever it takes, we're going to win. So kindness, what kindness is, has nothing to do with anything. Nevertheless, the kindness played essential part in their matches and their training. When we addressed this element and brought this concept of kindness into their performance. For example, I'll give you just a quick one. For example, when things don't go according to the plan, they're very ambitious individuals with a lot of desire to win and fear of losing. And of course, they get angry with themselves when things don't go according to the plan. So my message to them was, go ahead, just get angry, get frustrated, that's absolutely fine. However, don't drag your anger and frustration for too long. And don't drop your anger and frustration towards yourself too deeply. Don't become too personal. So therefore, the kindness was an essential element for them to move forward as quickly as possible. Not necessarily kind of patting themselves on the back when things don't go according to the plan, but just with kindness, move forward. So therefore, the mindfulness was an essential element in the Careless getting ready for the Olympic Games. But what is perhaps obvious, that it's not an individual sport like rock climbing or swimming. It is a team sport. So we said A, so we had to say B. And my job as a sports psychologist was to find the elements that will bring the team together. Two sets of brothers and best friend, playing together for many, many years. They take each other for granted. So therefore, the unkind comments, pressure, was just a part of this team. If somebody was struggling in this team to achieve their best performance, usually the comments that I heard through radio microphones was, get on with it, mate. And frequently, they were a bit harsh towards each other. So I thought, what can we do to bring the team together? We have mindfulness, what else? And the second part, which I found very inspirational, was compassion. And compassion has three elements, and that is noticing what's happening with an individual. It is appreciating what that the individual is struggling, and also desire to help. And His Holiness Dalai Lama in Desmond Tutu described it so well in these particular three elements. So we decided to go down this path. But first of all, we had to really address the tone of conversation. And I brought this concept of a very famous Russian philosopher, Georgy Pomeranets, who said that the devil is born from the angel's spitting rage. The tone of conversation is more important than the content of conversation. That was really, really important for them to take this concept on board. Irrespective how right you are, you absolutely have no right to scream and shout at your brother or your best friend. And therefore, the tone of conversation became well above, in terms of importance, than the content. You are right, so be it. But please have respect and have self-control to deliver this message in a kind, considerate manner. So therefore, whatever happens with them, win or lose, good shot or bad shot, the feedback that they provided to each other was charged, saturated with kindness. That was something that this team managed to follow through all the way, and including the Olympic Games. The second part of this intervention was we played a game. And I came across a fascinating TED Talk by Mandy Lynn Cartran. She talks about the exercise that was 36 questions introduced to couples that when the couples talk through these 36 questions, they seemingly fall in love with each other romantically. And I thought, you know what's interesting about this particular questionnaire? That's what we want to have, closeness, togetherness in the curling team. So that was a bit of an experiment. I took these 36 questions after Mandy's TED Talk, and we sat down with the coach and went through all 36 questions, amended them for the purposes of curling, and systematically, throughout 8 months, engaged the boys in conversations about themselves, quite personal questions. And I'll give you one example. The question number 1 is, if you had an opportunity to bring somebody, one person, dead or alive, to your fancy party, what person would it be and why? Just think about it. We are dealing with 5 extremely competitive athletes. Just think about what kind of answers would they give. For example, one of them was Usain Bolt, of course, Muhammad Ali, and Ali McCoist. That was the typical question about the last one. And the last boy said, my granddad. That was interesting. Why was it granddad? And he said, because the granddad died very soon after I was born, and I never had an opportunity to speak with my granddad. And my granddad was such an influential figure in Scottish curling. And I would love to sit down and have a chat with him. Wow. That was question number 1. How cool was that? And then the questions went on, became a little bit more personal, a little bit more complex. And let me assure you, I never had such degree of openness and connectivity between young men. It was a brave thing to do for them to answer the questions in the way they did. And very soon, these exercise, 36 questions, became probably their favorite exercise throughout these 8 months. They came to the Olympic Games best prepared, I would say, and indeed they said it themselves. They became much more compassionate. I saw the change in them. I heard them through the radio microphones, how much their transition, their journey from being a bit aloof and taking each other for granted to being much more compassionate, understanding what's happening with their teammates and knowing how to support them. You know, a little simple smile or pat on the back at the right time made significant difference. Okay, they didn't manage to win the medal. They came 5th. And that was probably one of the biggest disappointments of their lives to date. However, These are 5 extraordinary individuals. They threw their hat in the ring. They decided to go and do it. They really wanted to win, but they were not afraid of losing. And they knew that they were behind each other's back, and they knew how to support each other. In my opinion, that's the journey of real heroes, even though these 5 will never consider them as heroes. Very proud of them. Thank you.